My name is Eleanor Callahan, and at 67, I found out my own engagement party, thrown in my own living room, had a second item on the agenda I never agreed to. My son stood up with a glass of champagne in his hand. He smiled at 40 people I'd fed cake and coffee for 30 years. And he announced that his mother was moving to a retirement home because there was, in his words, no room for her here anymore. The room applauded. Actual applause. For that. Here's the part nobody at that party knew yet, the part that made the whole evening turn on its heel before dessert was even served. I wasn't moving to any retirement home. I already had a new house. I'd had it for 3 weeks. And the house they were all sitting in, the one my son had just promised his fiancée's family they'd be moving into? That wasn't mine to give away anymore either. I stood up. I let the clapping die down on its own. I didn't rush it. Then I raised my glass and said one sentence that emptied the room of its certainty. I spent 31 years as the finance director for our county school district. 9 schools, 1 motor pool, a budget that ran north of $40 million a year, and not one line item I didn't personally reconcile. People think a woman who balances budgets for a living is careful with numbers and careless with people. It's the opposite. You don't survive 31 years of school board meetings without learning to read a room the way you read a ledger, for what's stated, and for what's been quietly left off the page. My husband David was a contractor. Kitchens, additions, the odd barn restoration out past the county line. He built half the porches on our street with his own hands, including the one on the house I was about to lose without anyone bothering to ask me. David died 6 years ago in March. His heart, in his sleep, no warning, no goodbye. I woke up a widow at 61 with a paid-off house, a decent pension, and a silence in that house so complete I could hear the refrigerator hum from the bedroom. I did not fall apart. I want to be honest about that, because women my age get cast as either tragic or saintly, and I was neither. I was practical. I kept the house running. I kept myself running. I learned to be alone in a way that didn't feel like a punishment. There was one thing, though, that I never told anyone. Not my son. Not my daughter. Not even Dot, and Dot has known me since we were 22. In a drawer in my nightstand, I kept a single brass key on a faded ribbon. Years before David died, we'd rented a stone cottage for 1 week on Lake Ambrose. 2 bedrooms, a wood stove, a dock that leaned a little to the left. We stood on that dock our last morning there and David said, "Someday, Nora. When the house is too much and the district's finally done with you. Someday, a place just for us." He gave me the key as a joke, since it wasn't ours to keep. I kept it anyway. Someday had been sitting in that drawer for 11 years. I want you to hold on to that key. It matters more than anything else in this story. My son Grant is 34. Good job in marketing, better haircut than his father ever had, a laugh that fills a room the way David's used to. I love him the plain, uncomplicated way you love the person you carried and raised, even when he's being difficult. And for about 1.5 years, he had been difficult in a very specific direction. It started small. A comment about how much yard work the house took. A joke about how I rattled around in 4 bedrooms by myself. A magazine article he texted me, unprompted, titled "Downsizing with Dignity, When Is It Time?" I didn't take offense. Not at first. I told myself he worried the way sons worry. Then he started dating Peyton. Peyton Ashford is 29, sharp, polished, the kind of young woman who compliments your dish towels before she's finished taking off her coat. Her father, Kurt, sells real estate on the good side of the county, the kind of agent who wears a blazer to a Tuesday lunch. The first time Peyton walked through my front hall, she didn't look at me. She looked at the crown molding. "This is a gorgeous house," she said. "Original hardwood?" "Original everything," I said. "David and I bought it the year Grant was born." She smiled the smile people give a museum placard. I noticed. I filed it away the way I used to file a budget discrepancy that hadn't caused trouble yet. Not a crisis. Just a line I intended to keep watching. The second time Peyton came to dinner, she asked about square footage before she asked about my late husband. 4 bedrooms, right? Grant mentioned 4. 4, I said. 2 of them full of boxes we never got around to sorting. That's such a waste of space for just one person, she said, not unkindly, the way you'd note a mathematical fact. You could get a beautiful little condo somewhere and never have to touch a lawnmower again. Grant laughed and said, Peyton's very efficient, in a tone that told me he thought that was a compliment covering for her, and I let it pass, because it was one comment on one Tuesday, and I have never in my life built a case on one comment. I did notice, though, that she looked at my kitchen the way an appraiser looks at a kitchen. Not for the coffee stains on the counter where David used to set his mug every morning without fail. For the cabinets. For the layout. For what it would cost to make it hers. Grant proposed to Peyton on a Saturday in September, on the dock at a lake resort 2 hours north, down on one knee with a ring his grandmother would have approved of. He called me that same night, breathless, happy in a way I hadn't heard him in years. She said yes, Mom. Of course she did, I said. Congratulations, sweetheart. I meant every word of it. I want that understood. Whatever came after, that phone call was real, and my joy for him that night was real too. It was 3 weeks later that the tone in our house started to shift, and it shifted fast. Grant came by on a Sunday with 2 coffees, which was new, and sat at my kitchen table looking around the room the way a man looks at a car he's already decided to buy. Mom, Peyton and I have been talking, he said. I sipped my coffee and waited. 31 years in budget meetings teaches you that the person who talks first usually loses the negotiation. About the future. About settling somewhere. And this house, it's a lot of house for one person. It's the house you grew up in, I said. I know. And that's exactly why it makes sense. Keep it in the family. Peyton and I move in after the wedding, you get to see us settled somewhere that means something, and you get to finally relax somewhere smaller. Everybody wins. Everybody. There's that word again. It shows up right before someone explains why your loss is actually a gift you should be grateful for. That's a big decision to make over coffee, I said. We're not deciding today, Grant said, a little too quickly. Just floating it. Kurt mentioned Belhaven has a beautiful new wing. Independent living, no stairs, a whole social calendar. Peyton's aunt moved in last spring and loves it. You've already looked at Belhaven. Just online. Just to see. I looked at my son across the table where he'd eaten 10,000 bowls of cereal, and I understood, with the particular clarity you get from decades of reading budgets that don't quite balance, that this was not a passing thought. This was a plan with a name and a brochure already attached to it. Give me some time to think, I said. This is my house, Grant. I'll decide on my own timeline. Of course, he said, and smiled, and I noted that the smile arrived a half-second before the agreement did, which in my experience means the agreement isn't real. It's a placeholder until the next opening. The opening came 2 Sundays later, at a family dinner Peyton hosted at her parents' house, the kind of dinner where the good china comes out for no occasion anyone had named. Kurt carved the roast and, somewhere between the potatoes and the second glass of wine, mentioned, entirely too casually, that Belhaven was running a founder's rate for new residents through the end of the year. 12% off if you signed a letter of intent before December. Just something to think about, Eleanor, he said, not looking up from the roast. These things fill up fast. Wouldn't want you to miss the good rate. I wasn't aware I was shopping, I said. A small, polite laugh went around the table, the kind people use to smooth over a sentence they'd rather not examine too closely. Nobody's pushing anything, Peyton said, patting my hand across the table, her rings catching the candlelight. We just love you and want what's best. I looked at her hand on mine and thought about the tape measure in her bag, the one she never once left at home. Grant refilled his own wine glass without meeting my eyes. I finished my dinner. I complimented the potatoes. I drove home alone in the dark thinking about a founder's rate for a life I hadn't agreed to start living. If you've ever had someone hand you a decision about your own life already halfway made, wrapped up in the word family, I want you to type "I know that coffee" in the comments below. I read every one. And stay with me, because the coffee was only the opening bid. Here is the part one hadn't told Grant, hadn't told anyone but Dot, and even Dot only knew half of it. 2 months before that Sunday coffee, before Grant had even proposed, I'd already started quietly looking. Not because anyone pushed me. Because I'd stood in that kitchen alone one Tuesday night in July, made dinner for one the way I'd made it 1,000 times, and thought, clear as a bell, David was right. Someday's been sitting in a drawer long enough. I called Roz Kim, a realtor I'd known since our kids were in the same Cub Scout den, and told her I wanted to see what was available on Lake Ambrose. Quietly. No sign in my yard yet. No conversation with my children until I had something real to show them. Roz found the stone cottage in early August. Not the same one David and I had rented 11 years earlier, but close enough that when I walked onto the dock and it leaned a little to the left, I had to sit down on the porch step and just breathe for a minute. 2 bedrooms. A wood stove. Someone else's brass key on the counter, identical in weight to the one still riding around in my nightstand drawer. I put in an offer that week. $310,000, most of it in cash from David's life insurance and 31 years of a pension I'd never once dipped into. I hadn't told Grant any of this the morning he floated Belhaven across my kitchen table. I let him keep talking. I let him think the clock was his to set. Because by the time he brought up Belhaven, my offer on the lake cottage had already been accepted, and I had a closing date circled on my own calendar that none of them knew existed. I want to be fair here, because I've thought about this a great deal since. I didn't lie to my son that morning. I simply didn't correct the story he was telling himself. There's a difference, and I know some people will say it's a thin one. Maybe it is. But I'd spent 18 months watching a plan for my life get built in rooms I wasn't invited into, and I decided I was allowed to build my own plan in a room they weren't invited into either. Fair is a two-way door. They just hadn't noticed it swings both ways. Over the following weeks, the pressure didn't stay at the coffee table level. It moved into the house itself. Peyton started coming by on her own, without Grant, always with a tape measure in her bag just in case, always circling back to the same 3 questions. Whether the primary suite got morning or evening light. Whether the sunroom wall was load-bearing. Whether I'd thought any more about Belhaven. I answered politely and told her nothing that mattered. Then, on a Thursday in October, the mail arrived with an envelope addressed to Grant Callahan at my address, which struck me as odd since Grant hadn't lived here in 12 years. I almost set it aside unopened. Almost. But I'd learned something in 31 years of budgets: unopened envelopes are how surprises stay surprises. I've never once regretted opening one that was, strictly speaking, none of my business, when my own name was on the house it concerned. Inside was a contractor's estimate. Ferris and Sons Remodeling. A quote for $84,000 to open the wall between the kitchen and the sunroom, redo the primary bath, and, in a line that made my stomach drop an inch, remove existing built-in shelving, mother-in-law suite conversion, garage. Mother-in-law suite conversion. They were pricing out where to put me, in my own former house, as an afterthought line item under someone else's remodel. The estimate was dated for the week after what it called, in the project notes, target occupancy, post-wedding. I sat at my kitchen table with that piece of paper for a long time. I did not cry. I want to be honest, because I know some of you are picturing that moment as a tearful one, and it wasn't. It was the exact feeling I used to get finding a 6-figure discrepancy in a district budget the week before an audit. Cold. Clear. Entirely without sentiment. They hadn't just been thinking about the house. They'd already priced the renovation. I folded the estimate, put it in the cedar box David had built me for our 20th anniversary, the same box that already held the closing paperwork on my lake cottage, and I kept reading my mail very carefully after that. 3 days after the estimate arrived, I was out front trimming the hydrangeas when I heard Kurt's car idle in the driveway longer than a simple pickup required. His window was down. Grant leaned in. "The appraisal's already higher than I told Peyton," Kurt was saying. "Once your mom's out, we list the improvements, not the house. Big difference in how it reads to the bank." "She hasn't even said yes yet," Grant said, glancing toward the porch. I stepped back behind the hydrangea before he saw me. "She will," Kurt said. "They always do, once the room's already been decided for them. Nobody wants to be the one who says no at her own party." I stood very still with a pair of pruning shears in my hand and a very clear thought in my head. This was never a family conversation waiting to happen. This was a sales pitch that hadn't been delivered to me yet, being rehearsed in my own driveway. My daughter Callie called me 2 nights later. She's 31, a labor and delivery nurse 2 states away in Denver, and the only one of my children who has never once, in her entire adult life, asked me for money. "Mom, has Grant said anything to you about, like, plans? For after the wedding?" "He mentioned Belhaven," I said carefully. Callie went quiet in the particular way she goes quiet when she's deciding whether loyalty to a sibling outweighs loyalty to the truth. "I was on the phone with him last week and Peyton was in the background," she said. She didn't know I could hear her. She said, and I'm quoting, "Mom, once your mom's settled at Belhaven we can finally start the remodel. My dad already has a contractor lined up." There it was. Confirmed, out of a mouth that hadn't known it was on the record. "There's more," Callie said, and her voice tightened. "They're planning something for the engagement party. Peyton's been emailing me the toast agenda because she wants me to say a few words. Mom, item 2 on the agenda literally says, quote, house transition announcement, framed as a gift to Grant's mom, keep tone celebratory." Framed as a gift. Keep the tone celebratory. They weren't planning to ask me anything at that party. They were planning to announce it, in front of 40 people, dressed up as generosity, so that saying no in the moment would make me the villain of my own living room. "Mom," Callie said, "are you okay?" "I'm better than okay," I said, and for the first time since the mail arrived, I meant it completely. "Callie, I need you to do something for me. Don't say anything to Grant. Just come to that party a little early." If you have ever watched people build a story about your life loud enough and confident enough that you started to doubt whether your own truth would sound believable next to it, I see you. This is the part where I stopped doubting. Because I already knew something Peyton's toast agenda didn't account for. The house they were planning to knock a wall out of wasn't going to belong to any of us in 6 weeks. And if you want to see exactly how that math worked out for them, subscribe now, because the next part is the reason I'm telling you this story at all. I spent the 2 weeks after that phone call doing what I do best. Not confronting. Confirming. I called Ross first. My Lake Cottage closing was scheduled for the following Tuesday, 3 weeks before the engagement party. I asked her if there was any way to move it up, get it done clean and early, no loose ends. She said the Sellers, an older couple retiring to Florida, would probably jump at an earlier date if I paid the closing costs myself. I did. Some things are worth the extra $1,400. Then I called a young couple who'd been quietly, informally interested in my house for almost a year. The Delgados. Marcus works in hospital administration, his wife Priya teaches middle school science, and they have a toddler named Theo who once tried to eat a fistful of my hydrangeas on a walk past the yard. They'd told me, more than once, half joking, that if I ever thought about selling, they'd be first in line. I called them on a Wednesday morning and told them I wasn't joking anymore. We agreed on $645,000, all cash, no contingencies, and a closing date I set myself. 2 weeks before the party. Not one day of overlap where I'd be lying to anyone about what I owned. I called my attorney next, a steady, no-nonsense woman named Priscilla Nkemelu who'd done David's and my estate work for 15 years. I told her everything. The Belhaven pressure. The contractor's quote with my name reduced to a line item. The driveway conversation. The toast agenda. She was quiet for a moment after I finished. Nora, I want to be clear with you, because you deserve a straight answer and not a comforting one. They can't force a sale. Not without a court finding you incompetent, and nothing you've described suggests that's even remotely on the table. But I hear what you're really asking me. You want this airtight so there's no argument, no gray area, no well, Mom probably meant to. Exactly that. Then close early, keep every document, don't discuss the sale with any of them before it's final, and don't sign one single thing they hand you at that party. Not even a card. There won't be a pen in my hand, Priscilla. I promise you that. I paused. Am I being vindictive? Tell me honestly. You're being a woman who found her own name written into a renovation estimate as a line item to be removed, Priscilla said. There's a word for what you're doing, Nora, and it isn't vindictive. It's paperwork. I called Roz Kim the same afternoon and asked her to push the Lake Cottage closing up by 3 weeks if the sellers would allow it. She called back 40 minutes later. They said yes before I finished the sentence, Nora. Turns out they want to be in Florida for Thanksgiving. We set the date for the 3rd week of October, a full 3 weeks ahead of the party. Then I drove over to see Marcus and Priya Delgado myself, rather than calling. Some conversations deserve to happen across a kitchen table. We've said for a year we'd take it in a heartbeat, Marcus said, and Priya was already reaching for a legal pad before I'd finished my second sentence. Theo sat on the floor stacking measuring cups into a tower that kept falling over, laughing every single time it did. 6:45, cash, no contingencies, I said. And I need it closed within 3 weeks. I know that's fast. Eleanor, Priya said, we've had the down payment sitting in a savings account since Theo was born, just waiting for the right house to say yes back to us. This is the right house. We shook hands over that kitchen table, the same table David and I had eaten at for 28 years, and I felt, for the first time in a month and a half, entirely like myself again. One more call. I asked my regular physician, Dr. Okonjo, who I'd seen for a normal checkup in August, to send me a copy of that visit's notes. Cognition, memory, orientation, all recorded as unremarkable, months before anyone had ever floated the word Belhaven at me. I didn't need it as ammunition exactly. I needed it the way you keep a spare key. Just in case someone, someday, tried to say I hadn't been myself. By the 1st week of November, I owned a stone cottage on Lake Ambrose free and clear, key in hand, moving boxes already half-packed in the cottage's small second bedroom. I no longer owned the house on Meridian Street. The Delgados did, closing completed, keys handed over, congratulations exchanged over a bottle of wine on their new porch, the porch David had built with his own hands 28 years earlier. I asked the Delgados one favor before they moved their furniture in. Would they mind if I hosted one last gathering there, a family engagement party, before they settled in properly? Priya hugged me when I asked. Of course, Eleanor. It's still got your kitchen table in it. Use it as long as you need. So on the night of the party, every single guest who walked through that front door was standing in a house that belonged, on paper and in every legal sense that mattered, to a family named Delgado. Only I knew that. Grant didn't. Peyton didn't. Kurt, in his blazer, glass of Prosecco already in hand by 6:15, absolutely did not. I dressed carefully that evening. Not for vanity. For clarity. I wanted to be entirely, calmly myself when the room turned, because a woman standing very still is much harder to dismiss than a woman shouting. I put the brass key on its faded ribbon in the pocket of my cardigan. I brought the cedar box and set it, unremarked, on the sideboard by the door, the way you'd set down a coat. And I waited for my son to stand up. 40 people filled that living room. Peyton's parents, her aunt from Belhaven, cousins on both sides, my own sister-in-law, in the corner with a cranberry spritzer and a look on her face that told me she already sensed something in the air, the way old friends do without being told a single detail. Grant tapped his glass with a fork at 7:40. The room quieted the way rooms do for good news. I want to thank everyone for being here, he started, an arm around Peyton's waist. This has been the best year of my life. Peyton, you already know how I feel, but I'll say it in front of everybody anyway, marrying you is the smartest decision I've ever made. Applause, warm and real. I clapped too. I meant that part. Then his tone shifted, the way it had shifted at my kitchen table 6 weeks earlier, that same half-second delay before something practiced arrived. And I've got one more piece of good news tonight, he said, glancing toward me with a smile that he clearly believed was kind. Mom has decided it's time for a change. She's moving to Belhaven, where Peyton's aunt is, so she can finally relax and let someone else handle the yard work for once. A pause, just long enough for effect. Which means, he said, there's finally room for me and Peyton to start our life somewhere that already feels like home. This house. He raised his glass toward the room, toward the ceiling David had painted himself, toward the kitchen where I'd made 10,000 breakfasts. There's no room for her here anymore, not the way things are going to be, and Mom's been amazing about it. To new beginnings. The room applauded. Genuinely. Warmly. Kurt clapped the loudest of anyone, already picturing, I imagine, the commission on whatever house I was supposedly about to be shuffled into, or perhaps just the tidy symmetry of two families' real estate consolidating into one. 40 people, applauding the idea of my disappearance, dressed up as my decision. I let the sound finish on its own. I didn't cut it short. I wanted every person in that room to fully feel the applause land before I gave them something else to feel. Then I stood. I picked up my glass. I said nothing at first, just let the silence stretch until Grant's smile developed the first small crack of uncertainty at its edges, the particular crack that appears on a face that has just realized the script might not be the only one in the room. To the new house, I said. I let that sit. My new house. For a moment nobody moved. Peyton's smile stayed frozen in the shape it had been holding for the toast. Grant's arm was still half raised from his own glass. I'm not sure I follow, Mom, Grant said, laughing a little, the way you laugh when you're hoping it's a joke. You will, I said. Give me 2 minutes. I walked to the sideboard. I opened the cedar box. 3 months ago, before you and Peyton were even engaged, I bought a stone cottage on Lake Ambrose. I set the deed on the coffee table where 40 pairs of eyes could see the seal on it if they leaned close enough. I closed on it in October. It's mine, paid in full, and I move the rest of my boxes in next weekend. I reached into my cardigan pocket and set the brass key beside the deed. Your father gave me a key like this one 11 years ago and told me someday I'd need it. I think he was right on the timing, if not on the reason. Grant's mouth opened. Nothing came out yet. And this house, I said, gesturing at the room, at the crown molding Peyton had once complimented like a museum placard, isn't mine anymore either. I sold it 2 weeks ago. Closed, funded, keys transferred. It belongs to Marcus and Priya Delgado, who were kind enough to let me borrow their kitchen table for one more night so we could all be here together. Peyton's father set his Prosecco down very slowly on the mantel, the way a man sets down something he's suddenly afraid might make noise. That's not possible, Peyton said. This is Grant's childhood home. It's not for sale. It was never for sale by you, I said, gently, but without softening the words themselves. It was mine. It's the Delgados now. I'd ask you to be careful with their crown molding on the way out. Mom, Grant said, and his voice had lost every ounce of the warm, practiced ease it had carried 30 seconds earlier. Why would you do this without telling me? I looked at my son for a long moment. I want you to understand I wasn't angry in that moment. I was accurate, the way I'd told myself I'd be for weeks. I found the Ferris and Sons estimate in October, Grant. $84,000 to remodel a house that hadn't been offered to you yet. A line item labeled mother-in-law conversion, garage. I read Peyton's toast agenda too, the one that had my whole life filed under item 2, framed as a gift, keep the tone celebratory. I let that land. You didn't ask me anything tonight. You announced me. There's a difference, and I've had 18 months to notice it. Kurt cleared his throat, already recalculating, I imagine, whatever numbers had been running behind his eyes all evening. Eleanor, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. There hasn't, I said. I think there's been a very clear understanding on everyone's part except mine, and I've simply caught up. I looked at him directly. I heard you in the driveway 2 weeks ago, Kurt. About the appraisal. About how they always say yes once the room's already been decided for them. I'd be careful about idling near open windows in the future. He went very quiet. His wife looked at him, then looked away. Peyton's face had gone the particular shade of pale that comes when a plan you were counting on to solve a much bigger problem suddenly evaporates in front of 40 witnesses. I didn't know the full shape of that bigger problem yet. I would, within the week. From the corner, was the first person in the room to laugh, not unkindly, more like relief finding an exit. Well, she said into the silence, I'd say that's one hell of an engagement gift, Nora. A few people laughed with her, uncertain, the tension in the room looking for anywhere to go. Peyton's aunt, the one from Belhaven, leaned toward her sister and whispered something I couldn't hear, though I caught the shape of the word awkward forming on her lips. So wait, a cousin near the fireplace said, half laughing, half confused, is this a whole bit? Is this like a toast joke? It isn't a joke, I said, my voice even. I have the closing statement right here if anyone would like to see the date on it. October the 22nd. Ask the Delgados yourselves. They're planning to hang curtains in that window next week. Grant did not laugh. You let me stand up in front of everybody, he said quietly, and say all that. I did, I said. The same way you let a contractor price out where I'd sleep in my own house before you'd said one honest word to me about any of it. I'm not proud of the timing, Grant. I'm not sorry about the outcome. I want to be fair to my son even now, because understanding a person's fear doesn't require excusing what they built out of it, and I've learned those two things can live in the same sentence. What came out over the following days, mostly through Callie, was this. Grant and Peyton were nearly $40,000 in debt from the wedding they'd already started planning before the proposal photos even finished uploading, plus a failed attempt at a food truck business the year before that had eaten through most of Grant's savings. Kurt's own real estate business had slowed badly since a bad year in the market, and he'd been counting, more than anyone admitted out loud, on the referral and eventual commission from helping the family transition me and my house into something smaller. Nobody in that plan was purely a villain. Grant was frightened of money in the specific way people get frightened when they've never quite had enough of it and don't know how to say so plainly. Peyton had grown up watching her father sell other people's comfortable lives for a living and had absorbed, without ever meaning to, the idea that a house is a problem to be solved rather than a person's home to be respected. Kurt needed the deal more than he needed to examine what the deal actually cost me. Understanding where the plan came from didn't make it acceptable. It just meant I could set the boundary without needing to hate anybody while I did it. Grant called me 4 days after the party, his voice raw in a way I hadn't heard since he was 19 and had wrecked his first car. Mom, I've been thinking about nothing else. I'm sorry. I don't even know where to start being sorry. Start with why, I said. He was quiet a long moment. I was scared, he finally said. The wedding costs got away from us, the food truck thing wiped me out, and when Kurt started talking about the house, it felt like a solution just landing in my lap. I told myself it wasn't really taking anything from you, because you'd still be around, still be family, just smaller. Somewhere else. Smaller, I repeated. Somewhere else. Grant, I built 31 years of budgets. I know exactly what it costs when the person doing the erasing tells themselves it isn't really erasing. I know, he said, and for the first time in 18 months, he sounded like he actually did. I'm not angry that you needed help, Grant. I've spent my whole life being the person who helps. I'm not going to stop being your mother over this. But I am done being a line item nobody consulted. If you ever need to ask me for something again, ask. Out loud. To my face. Not through a contractor's quote and not through a toast. I hear you, he said. I do. I believed him, cautiously, the way you believe a first payment on a debt rather than the whole balance settled at once. The wedding is still happening, 6 months from now, smaller than they'd originally planned, paid for on a budget Grant built himself this time, one he actually showed me, unprompted, the way you show your mother something you're proud of rather than something you're managing her around. Peyton and I are not close. I don't know that we ever will be. But she sent me a note 2 weeks after the party, handwritten, on plain cream cardstock instead of anything monogrammed. Eleanor, it read, I keep replaying the toast in my head and it sounds so different once it's not just in my own head anymore. I helped write an agenda that turned your whole life into an item with a number next to it, and I told myself it was practical instead of asking whether it was kind. I don't expect you to trust me yet. I understand if you never fully do. I'm sorry, and I mean it more plainly than I've ever meant anything I've said to you before. Peyton. I read it twice, then set it in the cedar box, not because I'd forgiven everything it represented, but because a person owning what they did in writing, without an excuse folded into the same sentence, is rarer than people think. It's worth keeping as evidence of a start, even if I can't yet call it proof of an ending. That's about as honest a beginning as I could have asked for. Kurt and I have not spoken since that night, and I find I'm at peace with that. Some relationships end not with a slammed door but with both people simply understanding, without needing to say so, that there's nothing further to discuss. The Delgados moved the rest of their furniture into the house on Meridian Street the following weekend. Priya sent me a photo a few days later of Theo standing in the sunroom, the one that was never going to get its wall knocked out after all, both arms raised over his head like he'd just won something. I keep that photo in the cedar box now, right next to the deed. As for me, I live on Lake Ambrose now, in a 2-bedroom stone cottage with a dock that leans a little to the left, exactly the way David and I once stood on a different dock and imagined it 11 years ago. Callie flew in the weekend. I finished unpacking and spent 2 full days helping me hang curtains and argue with a wood stove that hadn't been used in years. On the second night, we sat out on that leaning dock with 2 glasses of wine, watching the lake go the color of a bruise as the sun dropped behind the far tree line. Dad would have loved this place, she said. He picked it, I said. 11 years before either of us knew it. She laughed, then went quiet. I keep thinking about that toast. About how close it came to actually working. If Grant had said it a different way, if you hadn't already had the papers, would you have just gone along with it? I thought about that question honestly before I answered it, because she deserved an honest answer and not a comforting one. Maybe once, I said. The version of me that spent 30 years saying yes so nobody would have to feel uncomfortable at my expense might have found a way to make peace with Belhaven, if it had been asked instead of announced. But I'm not sure that version of me exists anymore. I think your father's key finally caught up with the rest of me. I still keep a brass key on a faded ribbon. It doesn't live in a drawer anymore. It lives on a hook by my front door, the one I actually use every single day. People will tell you who they think you are, and sometimes they'll even applaud themselves for deciding it on your behalf. Sometimes they're cruel. More often, in my experience, they're just frightened, and it's easier to rearrange your life than to face their own. Let them talk. Let them toast. Let them applaud whatever story makes them comfortable. Then raise your own glass, and make sure it's your own house you're drinking to. If you've ever had someone plan your life out loud before they asked you a single honest question about it, tell me in the comments where you found your own version of that brass key. I read every one of them. And if you believe nobody gets to vote you out of your own front door, subscribe so you're here the next time somebody tries.